150 Newton meters, 1,500 watts of peak power, all of this in an e-bike that weighs around 20 kilos at very competitive prices. Unflow did it again. The PX will grab everyone's attention. Let's get right into the review. This new Unflow PX on paper is here to replace the previous PL. Although I'll tell you one thing, as of today when I'm recording this video, there's no confirmation that the PL will be discontinued after the launch of this new PX and the PR. That being said, it's very clear that the moment the Unflow and Abinox duo appeared, they blew past the entire e-bike competition. Well, the thing is that right now, on the day of the launch of this new PX with this new Abinox motor, what they've managed to do is outdo themselves. Just a few months later, why PX? Well, theoretically it comes from extremely powerful. As you know, that means extremely powerful. The lineup is easy to explain. There are only two models, the PX Carbon and the PX Carbon Pro. The model shown here and the one I tested, they share exactly the same carbon frame, the same integrated 700 watt-hour battery, and the new Abinox M2S system, which we'll talk about in a moment. The difference between one model and the other basically lies in the components. What we have here is a K4 category e-bike, mainly designed for powerful trail riding. A very lightweight enduro with 160 mm of travel in the front and 150 mm in the rear. And probably one of the big new features is that it's a mullet with a 29-inch wheel in the front and a 27.5-inch wheel in the back. Of course, there's also the option to put a 29-inch wheel in the back if you want by adjusting the flip chip and accepting that the geometries suggested by the brand will be altered. Now let's talk about what's generated the most hype in recent months, and what's clear is that this is the heart of this PX, which is the new M2S from Abinox, the new electric system, which I'm going to give you some data so you can compare it yourselves with what the previous Abinox electric system was. It was installed on the PL and was already a real revolution within the e-bike industry. But beyond the data I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be completely honest and transparent about this, because I've been a communicator for 11 years now. And during all this time, every time I've posted something about an e-bike, there's always been a hater saying, that's a motorcycle, you don't make any effort with that. And I always felt obligated to counter by saying, well, let's see. What it gives you is assistance, it gives you extra power, but it's not a motorcycle because you don't have a throttle to accelerate and make the vehicle move on its own. It always requires at least some of your own effort. What happens when you try this new M2S in person? Well, that line that used to be thick between off-road motorcycles and e-bikes has become very thin. Clearly, we're not talking about a motorcycle since we still lack a throttle grip. But the feeling, especially on really steep slopes, where the bike generates so much power that it can take you up to 25 kilometers an hour. Those sensations are much like those of an off-road motorcycle. And I don't know, I think it's a lot more force, a lot more power than practically any user really needs. Maybe I'm saying this from the perspective of weighing 70 kilos with gear and everything. Let's say 75. I understand there are heavier people who need more power. But there comes a point where, depending on the assist mode, you really don't have to put in any effort at all for the bike to take you uphill. Are you basically just spinning the pedals? Is this good or is this bad? I don't know. What I do know is that it's fun. It's brutally fun. It opens up a new frontier in terms of how to use this kind of bike. All of this comes with a super progressive, supernatural power delivery. The motor is exactly as quiet as in the previous generation. Maybe the only thing I could question about the official information from Abinox is that they say they've improved efficiency and so on. They've optimized it. I think this motor is more powerful. We've gone from a V8 to a V12 and this motor uses more power. Just to give you an idea how much, I can't say, we lack the tools to measure it. But I think that easily with the same batteries, we're talking about around 10% compared to the previous motor. If we take a look at the geometry numbers of this bike, we quickly see that the engineers wanted it to perform really well for aggressive trail riding or light enduro use. That's more or less what this bike is meant for. Compared to the previous PL, we've seen that the reach is a little longer, the head tube angle is also a bit slacker. Maybe the most drastic change has to do with the seat tube angle. It reaches 78 degrees and this should help us pedal more efficiently and make the bike feel more stable, especially on very steep climbs because your hips won't drop as much compared to your shoulders. On the other hand, we have the addition of the flip chip, which will allow us to adjust the chainstay length to be shorter or longer than what we had on the PL. And therefore, this will also affect the bottom bracket height or even the wheelbase. The aesthetic lines of this new PX follow those that the PL already had, with that Unflow philosophy of trying to hide this bike's e-bike look as much as possible. That's why the down tube is always made as thin as possible. And in this case, according to what Unflow tells us, they have managed to reduce that thickness by 20% compared to the previous model. I guess that's also where the change from an 800 WH battery comes from to a slightly smaller 700 W1. At the same time, that reduction in battery capacity is somewhat offset, because Unflow tells us, in this case Abinox, that they have managed to increase the energy density of their cells by 16%. That being said, what we could expect from the Chinese is that they would quickly learn from their mistakes. And if there's one thing that's clear when you get on this bike, it's that the weak point of the previous PL has been fixed, because we practically had no lateral stiffness in the rear triangle. And here there has been significant reinforcement in this whole area, which results in a slight increase in weight. But it's well worth it to make the ride much safer and more stable, especially when taking fast corners. That said, if you're looking for an even more robust bike, an e-bike that lets you go even wilder, you should know that today Unflow has also launched the PR exactly with the same motor, and there's a review video here on the channel which I'll leave for you to check out, because from a price point of view that one is much more competitive. Well, I've already told you that going uphill it's amazing because almost everything depends on the motor. But how does this bike go downhill? Well, I would say it's like an all-around good bike. In all areas it gets a good score, an average of 8 out of 10. There's no specific aspect where it excels, nor where it just passes, and of course it doesn't fail in any area. It's very balanced in terms of geometry. It's true that we can push it much harder on descents than the previous PL. Because of the suspension, due to the solid improvement we've mentioned in the rear triangle, cornering has improved a lot. I think the mullet setup has worked really well for it, because it has improved traction and the ability to accelerate the rear wheel when climbing. And on the other hand, it was already good at twisting through slow, tight corners. But now with the mullet, even more so, despite having slackened the head angle. Then, for example, there's a situation where I felt very stable with it, which is going down a slope at very low speed. Okay, with a steep slope at very low speed, the bike feels very stable. And maybe the weak point that I found has mainly been in a straight line at high speed. That's where it lacks a bit of stability. However, the other bike I mentioned that was just launched today, AMFLOW, the PR, in that situation is like an arrow. It's super stable. As for the electronics, we have quite a long list of things to talk about. And even so, I'm going to forget half of them because it's endless, right? Well, we have the screen that we already had on the PL. In the top tube to control everything, we have online navigation, route integration with Komoot, with Strava, Apple Find My, also as a bike locator, although you can even have a SIM card inside. The anti-theft system, which is this password you set on the bike, because if you don't, when you move it, what's going to happen is that an alarm will go off, just like a car alarm. The integrated light comes as standard. This is also a difference compared to the previous model, at least in the first batches. The ability to customize all the assistance modes, you can spend a lot of time playing around with this now. It's amazing. You can activate an option that makes the bike change gears without you having to pedal. It's called smooth shifting. And also the possibility to limit charging to a certain percentage, 80, 70, 90, mainly to take care of the battery's health. So as you can see, you can spend hours and hours with your phone in hand, using the app, customizing your e-bike. When it comes to components, we pretty much have the best of the best. Fox Kashima suspension with a 36 in the front and the equivalent in the rear shock. Then we have a specially reinforced SRAM X0 drivetrain for e-bikes, even more robust than those used in regular cross-country. Then here we have Unflow carbon wheels with 30 mm internal width rims, which works very well as a base for mounting these Spable 2.5 tires, both front and rear. And you'll see why, because we have 2.03mm diameter rotors, both front and rear, with the Gustav brakes from Magura with 4 pistons. Weight. According to Unflow, it has an official weight that should be around 20 kilograms. I'll show you what it weighed for us in the workshop. Already tubeless, with everything ready to ride. The headlight included, absolutely everything except the pedals in size. Judge for yourselves. I think the weight, while not as absurdly competitive as the previous PL, still comes in at a very good weight. For a bike with this motor power, with this battery capacity as well. And honestly, I think that small increase in weight is something I appreciate, because the bike from the previous PL had that little bit of, not exactly danger, but it was hard to predict in fast corners. So with this, we've gained a lot of stability thanks to those extra grams. As for the price, we're following the line already set by the PL, with the Carbon at 7,000 euros and this Carbon Pro at 10,000 euros. What's happening this time is that the new addition to the Unflow catalog, the PR with super competitive prices, I think is going to take a lot of sales away from this bike. Again, the review video is up if you want to check it out. Let's move on to your favorite part. Pros and cons. I'll start with what I liked. Obviously, the motor is amazing. The bike feels more robust than the previous model. The weight is still competitive for me, and the handling is awesome. The bike comes fully assembled in the box. I'm mentioning this in case you buy it online, so you know that basically you just need to set it up tubeless, and that's it. On the other hand, another thing the Chinese have learned compared to the previous model is that the first batch of PL there were internal cables that weren't properly installed. They moved around and made noise. You had to take apart the whole battery for it to work properly, and then the seat post cable wasn't quite right either. All of this has been fixed. The bikes now come ready to ride straight from the factory. And of course, the look of a traditional regular bike, which is really well done. Now let's talk about the things I didn't like as much. Well, to start, the mullet setup brings a lot of advantages when it comes to handling, but the fact that it has 2 wheels of different diameters and that you need 2 different sizes of spare tubes, it's not a big deal, but it's something to keep in mind. Then on the other hand, there's the issue of power consumption, which, as I mentioned, I think there's about 10% higher power consumption with this motor, especially when you really push it. There are no small sizes. This is a problem that still exists with Unflow, since the sizing starts from size M and up. And well, there's the matter of the 700 watt-hour battery, which I think is good, and I think it fits the type of audience that's going to be looking for this bike. But for that type of audience, there's still a niche in e-bikes, the ones looking for a machine to compete with. I know this is still in a very early stage and all that. It could be that this small reduction in battery capacity, combined with the increased consumption of the motor itself, puts you in a situation where you can't make it to the finish line with enough battery, and you end up stranded along the way. It's not going to be a problem for any other more recreational type of rider, who in the end will be riding in eco or trail modes. If you're considering competing, I've done some of these races, you're always at full throttle, using all the motor's power, so you need high capacity batteries. Have they increased the cell density by 16%? Yes, but between the fact that they've reduced it by 100 watt hours and the motor's consumption has increased, for people who are thinking about those races of around 40 to 45 kilometers, 1,500 meters of elevation, pushing the motor to the limit the whole time. I haven't tested it, but I think that's where it might be limited. Who is this e-bike for? I think it's for someone looking for the latest technology, the most powerful motor in the history of e-bikes, a bike that handles in a balanced way. I have my reservations when it comes to people who are thinking about buying an e-bike to compete. All of this will also depend on how the races end up being standardized. But if they go for something a little longer, like 50 kilometers or so, I'm not sure to what extent this is the best option. I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you think about this bike. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments. See you next time and stay happy. Bye.